I'm a graduate student studying mechanical engineering at a university on the East Coast. I'd only recently moved here, and things were pretty good. I was finally settling into classes, made a couple of friends, and found a decently priced apartment. The building was old and in a sketchy part of town, and the building manager seemed a bit unreliable, but I figured I could deal with it. I had my car, so I didn't mind the commute. It was a small price to pay for the peace and quiet of living alone. But that peace didn't last long. One afternoon, I left my backpack in the campus library while grabbing a quick coffee. And when I came back, it was gone. My wallet, laptop, and keys were all inside. The worst part was there were no security cameras in that area of the library. I was frustrated, but I reported it to campus security, canceled my cards, and notified my building manager about the missing keys. He barely paid attention, muttering something about getting around to it. It felt strange that he didn't seem to care about the security issue. That's when I started to feel uneasy. A couple of days later, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. I figured it was a reminder from the manager about the locks, but when I opened it, I froze. The note just said, "I know where you sleep." No signature, no name, just those 5 words. My stomach turned. The realization hit me hard. Whoever had stolen my backpack knew where I lived. At first I thought maybe it was a prank or some twisted joke, but the idea that someone had my keys and my address kept nagging at me. The unease only grew when, over the next few days, more notes appeared, all handwritten, each one a little more unsettling than the last. Watch your back. Don't get too comfortable. I see everything. Every time I came home, I'd look around, wondering if someone was watching. Then, one night, while getting ready for bed, I noticed a flash of light outside my window. I quickly closed the blinds, but the thought that someone was out there, watching, left me too tense to sleep. The next day I told my friend Ethan about it. He's one of the first friends I'd made here, and he'd been in town for years, so I figured he might have some advice. Ethan told me not to worry, that this area was known for odd people, but that most of them kept to themselves. Despite his reassurance, strange things kept happening. I started noticing small changes in my apartment. Things moved around, my shoes in a different spot, drawers slightly open. I chalked it up to stress and thought I might just be losing track of things. But that was until one night when I woke up around 3 a.m. and found the front door unlocked. I knew I had locked it before going to bed. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I called my building manager, Frank, again, practically begging him to change the locks. But he brushed me off, saying he'd take care of it soon. I was furious and even considered calling a locksmith myself, but I was short on cash, and Frank had made it clear I'd be breaking the lease if I did. As the days went on, the notes continued, each one a little more personal and specific. Then one evening, I came home to find my bedroom trashed. Clothes were scattered everywhere, drawers were pulled out, and my bed sheets were stripped. I felt violated, terrified. I called the police, but without forced entry or missing property, they didn't have much to go on. The officers suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights. I considered it, but something about this situation made me want answers. I had this gut feeling that whoever was doing this wasn't done. That night, I barely slept. My phone buzzed around 1 a.m. with a text from Ethan, checking in. I told him everything, and he offered to come over. But as I was texting him back, I heard something, a soft scratching sound near the window. I froze, barely breathing, listening. I slowly got up, phone in hand, and peeked through the blinds. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow moving away from the building. The next morning, Ethan came over to check the place with me. As we looked around, I found another note in my closet, shoved between some clothes. Almost caught me. The realization hit us both. This person had been inside my apartment, hiding close enough to hear me move around. Ethan looked shaken, suggesting I go to a motel, but I decided to stay. I had enough of feeling powerless. We went out that day and bought a small cheap camera. I hid it in my room, aimed at the door. I was determined to catch whoever was messing with me. I went about my usual routine, but left the camera recording every time I stepped out. 2 nights later, I got back and checked the footage. My heart raced as I saw a figure, dressed in dark clothing, moving around my room. But here's the twist. They weren't just walking around. They were putting my things back in place. It was like they wanted to leave everything just slightly out of order, enough to mess with my head. Watching it, I felt sick. I showed the footage to Ethan, who recognized something I hadn't noticed. The person in the video had the same build as Frank, our building manager. We both knew we had to confront him, but we wanted proof. The next day, Ethan and I staged a plan. I pretended to leave for class, then doubled back to watch from a distance. Sure enough, Frank showed up about an hour later, glancing around before unlocking my door and slipping inside. I called the police immediately, telling them I had footage and was watching him break in. The officers arrived in minutes, catching Frank red-handed. But here's the part that left me shaken. It wasn't Frank behind the notes, the break-ins, or the constant feeling that I was being watched. It was Ethan. As the police pieced together the details, they discovered that Ethan had orchestrated everything from the start. He'd stolen my backpack to gain access to my keys and wallet, knowing that I'd come to him for help and support. Every strange event, every moved object, every chilling note, all of it was part of his twisted plan to keep me close and dependent on him. Frank's role was limited. He'd only entered my apartment that day to fix a plumbing issue, and wasn't aware of the torment Ethan had been putting me through. Ethan had somehow even convinced Frank to delay the lock change, making sure I'd feel even more vulnerable. When the police searched Ethan's apartment, they found a hidden box containing all the items that had gone missing from my place, including several detailed notes about my routine. There were photos of me taken from across the street, from my favorite coffee shop, even from the hallway outside my door. His notes were meticulous. Every class I attended, every shift in my mood, even details about our conversations. Ethan's plan had been sinister from the start. He wanted me to feel unsafe, isolated, and eventually dependent on him as my one true friend. The more I struggled with fear and paranoia, the more he'd be there, offering support and advice, making sure I'd rely on him and no one else. He'd wanted to be my savior, building an obsession that left me vulnerable to his influence. After his arrest, Ethan confessed that he'd always been drawn to people he felt were in need of protection, justifying his actions as a way to show his loyalty and devotion. In his twisted logic, every scare, every unsettling message, every intrusion into my personal space was a test to show that he was always there, watching out for me. I moved out that very week, but even now, in a new apartment, with fresh locks and security cameras, I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time my phone buzzes unexpectedly, or I find something out of place, I wonder if he's out there, waiting. Trusting someone again seems impossible, after discovering that the person I leaned on had been behind it all.